What if the place where Moses would have received the tablets of the law is not the Mount Sinai you've always heard about? What if, in fact, the true sacred mountain is hidden in a forbidden region, far from the eyes of the world, where only a few have dared to tread? This changes everything: history, faith, and maybe even prophecies. Imagine the scene: the mountain enveloped in smoke, thunder echoing across the desert, the people waiting in silence. Moses climbing, alone, to meet God. That image is powerful, isn't it? But now, archaeological evidence and ancient records are challenging the traditional site that has been touted for centuries as Mount Sinai. Have we been looking in the wrong place this whole time? Have you ever been through this? Have you heard a story since you were a child, believed in it for years, and suddenly you come across something that seems to dismantle everything you've learned? Stay with me until the end, because what you discover now may surprise you a lot. Independent researchers, satellite images, and even ancient reports point to a different mountain, located not in Egypt, as previously thought, but in Saudi Arabia. A mound with a blackened top, as if it had been burned. Inscriptions in Hebrew, an altar of stones, and a rock split in half, in the exact way that the biblical account describes when Moses struck the stone and water gushed out of it. Coincidence? Or clues that were before our eyes but no one wanted to see? This is not just another video about biblical archaeology. It is an in-depth investigation into one of the holiest places in the Bible, the real Mount Sinai, a story shrouded in faith, mystery, and perhaps something that has been hidden for centuries. So take a deep breath. Because now begins the journey into one of the most provocative discoveries in sacred history, and the next detail could change the way you understand it all. And while these discoveries challenge everything we thought we knew about Mount Sinai, it's impossible not to wonder, why isn't this information everywhere? Why is something so great, which can prove one of the most remarkable moments in biblical history, still kept as an open secret? Is it fear, political interests, or simply collective ignorance? Whatever the answer, one thing is certain: truth has the power to transform not only history, but also the way we connect with the sacred. And speaking of connection, if this topic makes sense to you, if in some way it touched something inside you, a memory, an old doubt, or even that desire to know more about the lost places of the Bible, leave here in the comments what has caught your attention the most so far. It's incredible when new theories emerge, but even more powerful is when we can talk about them, share feelings, and build this path of discovery together. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this message. So if you're enjoying this type of content, click like. This really helps YouTube understand that this topic deserves to be seen. And if you want to continue exploring these revelations with me, subscribe to the channel right now and activate the bell. There's a lot coming: mysteries, impressive finds, and questions that are still waiting for answers. Because the truth is sometimes hidden, but never silent. And it continues to whisper among the ruins, in the sun-baked stones, in the forgotten ancient texts. And that's where we're going now. If you've ever found yourself wondering whether the Bible's accounts are more than spiritual metaphors or symbolic stories, you're not alone. There is something powerful in the act of seeking, of delving beyond the surface, of questioning what has been taught as right, and yet keeping faith alive. Because believing doesn't have to mean accepting everything without thinking. On the contrary, true faith is often born when we have the courage to go deeper, to dig through layers of tradition, history, and even manipulation. When we talk about a place as emblematic as Mount Sinai, this search becomes even more intense. After all, we are talking about the setting of one of the most impactful moments in the biblical narrative, the direct encounter between God and man. The mindset with which we approach this topic matters a lot. It's not just about locating a mountain on a map, but about understanding the spiritual and cultural impact this can have on our view of the sacred. If the traditional location of Sinai is wrong, It is not just a geographical error. It's an entire piece of history being repositioned. It is as if part of our own faith heritage is being realigned with hidden truth that has been buried for millennia, waiting to be rediscovered. What else might be out of place? The most impressive thing is to realize that while many disbelieve or simply ignore it, there are researchers, explorers, and scholars who are courageously walking through forbidden deserts, risking everything to record traces that, curiously, coincide with the descriptions in the book of Exodus. Stones carved with ancient symbols, stone fences that resemble altars. The mountain with the blackened top, as if it had been burned by fire, just as the Bible describes when God descended on the mountain. These are details that, in isolation, could be coincidence. But together they form a mosaic that begins to reveal something extraordinary. And at this point, we need to talk about something bigger than a simple archaeological discovery. We are talking about a journey of transformation. When you allow new information to make room in your perception, something inside you also changes. It changes the way you see the past, how you interpret the signs around you, and even how you see the decisions you make every day. Because if even the location of Mount Sinai could be wrong, a place that for centuries was taken for granted, what else could be asking for revision in our spiritual history? This is where the value of distrusting the obvious comes in, of understanding that not everything that has been taught with authority represents the full truth. Sometimes the truth was just silenced, pushed aside out of convenience or out of fear of what it might reveal. And when you access this type of content, you're not just listening to a new theory. You are accessing behind the scenes of a faith that pulses, that lives, that adapts, but that also resists time. Like those forgotten mountains that are still, they are defying the silence of the ages. And if this is all right, if the real Mount Sinai is really that isolated mountain in the middle of the Arabian desert, in restricted territory, what does this mean for us? The location changes. The signals match. The story fits. But most of all, it awakens a deep feeling that perhaps we are closer to the truth than we imagine. And this proximity to truth is not just geographic, it is spiritual. Because ultimately, what is at stake is not just where God spoke to Moses, but what he continues to say to this day, and how many of us are still willing to listen. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because when we start to connect the clues that have been left over time, we realize that this mystery goes far beyond a mountain. It extends through secret passages of history, through maps that have been redrawn, through names that have changed places. And all of this points to something much bigger. Comment there. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the story we were told may just be part of something much bigger and more strategic than it seems. For centuries, virtually all maps and pilgrimages pointed to Mount Sinai, located on the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt. It's what most people learned, what appears in school books, classic documentaries, and even religious tourist itineraries. But there is a little talked about detail. The choice of this location as the real Sinai was never made based on solid archaeological evidence. It was, to a large extent, a political, geographical, and even convenient decision for the interests of the time, and that's when the controversy starts to gain momentum. There is another mountain, further away, more isolated, and surrounded by an impressive number of signs that match the biblical description of Mount Sinai. Your name? Jebel al-Lawz, a mountain located in the northwest region of Saudi Arabia. Few have heard of it, and even fewer have gained access. But the few records we have from independent explorers, satellite images and field investigations bring to light something impossible to ignore. The mountain's summit is dark in color, as if it had been burned by fire, exactly as the text of Exodus describes. And Mount Sinai was smoking because the Lord had descended on it in fire. There are records of structures that resemble stone fences, which could have been used to keep people away from the base of the mountain, something also described in detail in the biblical account. There are stone altars positioned in specific areas. And the most intriguing thing, there are traces of a rock split in half, with signs of erosion that indicate the intense passage of water. A direct reference to the moment when Moses struck. The rock and water gushed out from it to satisfy the people of Israel in the desert. The question that echoes at this point is inevitable. Why is this place, with so much visual and geographical evidence compatible with the biblical narrative, not officially recognized as Mount Sinai? And the answer, although uncomfortable, seems to be behind the scenes of the story. The traditional Egyptian location was established centuries ago for convenience, for ease of access, proximity to centers of power, and, of course, for the political stability that Egypt offered compared to other more restricted regions. When Helena, mother of the Roman Emperor Constantine, declared that this was the sacred mountain, this became accepted practically without dispute. The problem is that there were no serious excavations, no concrete evidence, just a tradition imposed by authority. And this tradition has become resistant to change. After all, admitting that the real Mount Sinai could be in another country, outside the control of established religious narratives, would mean rewriting not only tourist itineraries, but also questioning decisions that shaped the faith of entire generations. And that, for many institutions, is simply too risky. The impact would be profound, theological, political, cultural. It is easier to keep things as they are than to make room for new interpretations that could shake comfortable certainties. But the truth has a curious behavior. It always finds a way to emerge. And in this case, she is starting to reveal herself through the clues that were left behind. A cracked rock, a burned pile, an abandoned altar in the desert. Elements that, by themselves, may not prove everything. But together, they tell a story. A story that, contrary to official versions, appears to have deep roots in reality. A reality that does not depend on tradition, but on research, which is not imposed, but discovered. And this journey of discovery also transforms the way we deal with faith. Because when facing this evidence, something inside us moves. It is as if faith stopped being just a feeling and also became understanding. As if the search for God also involves the courage to review what we have learned and to open ourselves to revelations that were hidden in plain sight. A change of mentality begins to happen. We leave the field of accept and enter the field of question, explore, discover, and that in itself is already a spiritual revolution. The Jebel al-Lawz remains there, silent, in territory closed to tourism, surrounded by mystery, closely watched. But its existence challenges the world to look again, rethinking maps, reassessing certainties, facing the possibility that the Bible, once again, may be right, even when the world around insists on doubting it. Right there. That makes sense to me. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because when discoveries stop being just old reports and start to appear before our eyes, in satellite images, documented records, and physical evidence, everything changes proportions. What was once just faith now begins to dialogue with facts. And this has a direct impact on the way we perceive reality. What previously seemed only symbolic or unattainable begins to take shape, texture, and location. And that's exactly what's happening with the possible true location of Mount Sinai. In recent years, independent expeditions, some unofficial, carried out almost clandestinely, have brought to light a series of records from Mount Jebel al-Lawz in the Saudi Arabian desert. With the advancement of imaging technologies, satellite photos began to reveal something that, at first glance, seems simple, but for those who know the biblical account, it is a glaring sign. The top of the mountain is darkened, as if it had been burned. It's not a shadow, it's not an effect of the sun, it's burnt rock. And this is where the sacred text echoes with even more force. And the Lord descended on Sinai in fire, and the smoke went up like the smoke of an oven. But it doesn't stop there. Around the mound, there is physical evidence of an ancient camp. stacked stone fences, possibly used to contain animals or demarcate sacred spaces, as the Hebrews used to do. There are also remains of stone altars, strategically positioned in places where biblical archaeology indicates that they would be common for sacrifices of communion and worship. This begins to stop being a coincidence and becomes historical coherence. And there is a specific detail that few talk about, but which is perhaps one of the most shocking. A large rock cracked in half, with visible signs of vertical erosion that suggest that water flowed from there at some point. Exactly as described, in the passage where Moses strikes the rock and it gushes water in the middle of the desert. Many have tried to treat this as an allegory, but when the image of the rock appears, broken with symmetrical perfection and clear marks of the passage of water, it is difficult to ignore. And the most disconcerting thing is knowing that this place, to this day, remains under heavy surveillance, with extremely limited access. The question that no one wants to remain silent is, what exactly is being protected there? This type of discovery updates faith. It renews not only curiosity, but also the sense of urgency, because it begins to become clear that there are hidden truths waiting to be revealed, and that these revelations could cause a profound transformation in the way we understand not only the past, but the present. When faith and evidence meet, there is no room for neutrality. The mind expands, spirituality deepens, and the perception of the divine stops being just a belief and becomes a real, tangible journey, full of clues left over time. These discoveries are not isolated in scientific archives or stored in closed rooms. They are leaking. They are being published on archaeology blogs, discussed in alternative academic circles, and gaining traction in communities that dare to look beyond the official. The mainstream media still ignores it, perhaps due to lack of interest, or perhaps because certain truths still scare us. But the curious thing is that the more silence we try to maintain on this subject, the more it resonates. Truth behaves like this. It echoes even in stones. And the most fascinating thing is to think that this could all be connected to something bigger. Perhaps these signs are emerging now not by chance, but by necessity. A subtle call, or perhaps not so subtle, to review our certainties, reconstruct narratives, and understand that there are spiritual decisions being required of us. It's not just about archaeology. It is a journey of consciousness, an expansion of mentality, the kind of awakening that makes you look at a mountain in the desert with different eyes, not as just any mountain, but as a meeting point between heaven and earth, right there. That makes sense to me. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because when we start to put the pieces together carefully, like someone examining an old map by candlelight, we realize that what we have before us are not just theories. They are concrete, visible, documented evidence. And what they reveal has the power to deconstruct official versions and rekindle the flame of the search for a forgotten truth. Jebel al-Lawz, that mountain hidden inside Saudi Arabia, is not just an interesting suspect. It bears visible markings that echo with striking precision the accounts in chapters 19 and 24 of the book of Exodus, and it's impossible to ignore that once the details start to line up. Satellite photos are one of the first signs. When we look from above, the top of Mount Jebel al-Lawz stands out from the rest of the desert. It is darkened, as if it had been consumed by fire. And this is not a common phenomenon. The surrounding formations have a normal, rocky, light color, which makes the contrast even more impressive. Geologists who examined the images suggest that the darkening of the rock may have occurred from intense exposure to heat. But what would cause selective burning on a mountaintop with no known volcanic activity? This is where the biblical text resurfaces with force. The mountain was smoking because the Lord had descended on it in fire, and the whole mountain was shaking greatly. The similarity no longer feels like an allegory. It feels like a literal description. These images have taken over the digital world, but rarely appear in traditional media outlets. Why? Because they don't fit into the already established narrative. But independent researchers did not remain silent. Ron Wyatt, one of the most controversial and discussed names in biblical archaeology, was one of the first to investigate the region in the 1980s. And even without official recognition, his and other explorers' records show sites that match what one would expect to find in an Exodus scenario. There is evidence of altars formed by large blocks of stone, one of them with engravings that resemble drawings of calves. This is particularly significant, as it directly refers to the episode of the golden calf built by the people of Israel while Moses was on the mountain. Another point that cannot be ignored: remains of broken columns and ruins that appear to have been positioned symbolically, perhaps to mark a sacred event or an access border. In Exodus 19, God commands Moses to delimit the base of the mountain, so that no one, not even the priests, goes beyond the limits and dies. These structures delimiting the area in Jebel al-Lawz may not be coincidental. They dialogue with this commandment. And when these ruins are compared with ancient maps and accounts, the puzzle begins to take shape. Furthermore, the mountain is surrounded by dry and rugged areas, but interestingly, there are records of a bedrock on the side of the mountain where researchers found signs of intense water erosion. A land where water appears to have flowed strongly in an environment where this would be impossible under current climate conditions. This erosion, associated with the rock split in half, makes a direct connection with another key moment in the Exodus: the miracle of water gushing from the stone. Many scholars argue that this cannot be a simple geological coincidence, considering all the other signals gathered in the same location. The most curious thing, and perhaps most disturbing, is the fact that this area is strictly controlled by the Saudi government. Most expeditions that gained access did so in a risky manner, with limited records. Some of the most shocking photos circulating on the internet were taken hastily, with improvised equipment. And when an attempt is made to organize an official expedition, access is blocked. The question returns with more force: why can't one freely explore an area that, in theory, is just an unimportant mountain? What exactly needs to be kept out of the public eye? There are also reports of inscriptions on stones that, according to some experts, were written in Proto-Hebrew, one of the oldest forms of the Hebrew language known. This information, if confirmed, is explosive. It suggests the presence of a Hebrew people in that region at a time compatible with the departure from Egypt. And this strengthens, once again, the idea that the Exodus route may have been very different from what we have always been taught. Perhaps the Israelites did not just follow where it was touristy, but where it was safe, strategic, and as the divine voice guided them, along paths that official history preferred not to map. The key. Mindset changes when we begin to accept the possibility that the Bible may have been, all along, more accurate than we assumed. That the signs were there, that the places existed, what miracles they left traces, and that, behind the desert dust and political curtains, there is still a story waiting to be read again, with different eyes, with another disposition, with a thirst for revelation. Comment there. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because amid all this evidence, records, and cross-references with the biblical text, there is an even more delicate and perhaps more revealing layer that few dare to touch: the silence around the place. What makes the Jebel al-Lawz even more intriguing is not just the physical signs that coincide with Scripture. It is the fact that it is located in a highly controlled access zone with severe restrictions for civilians, journalists, and researchers. It's not just about bureaucracy. It's active surveillance, armed guards, barriers, and no convincing explanation as to why there is so much secrecy surrounding a simple mountain. This raises one of the most provocative questions of this entire journey. What exactly are they trying to keep the world from seeing? Why is such a remote place, in the middle of the desert, far from the most relevant commercial or strategic routes, being protected as if it held a highly valuable secret. The territorial security argument is the first to appear, of course. But is that all? Or is there something bigger, more symbolic, that needs to remain out of the public eye? Some scholars argue that the blockade may have much deeper roots than military or logistical interests. They suggest that there is a veiled, perhaps even involuntary, effort to keep the traditional narrative intact. Because if the real Mount Sinai is indeed outside the Sinai Peninsula, as most printed Bibles and theological maps present, this would mean reopening an entire discussion that institutional history preferred to close centuries ago. It would be necessary to admit that the place established by tradition, faith, and politics was wrong. And this affects powerful structures. Think about it. How many religious pilgrimages, how many tourist centers, and how many theological studies have been built on the premise that Egyptian Sinai is the real one? Changing this version would not just be updating a point on the map. It would be reviewing dogmas, giving new meaning to symbols, breaking paradigms. It would be admitting that the sacred history that many have learned has perhaps been diverted, not out of malice, but by political decisions made at a time when faith needed physical landmarks to sustain itself. And when we look behind the scenes at these decisions, we realize that they were not made by prophets or archaeologists, but by emperors, influential religious people and leaders who, out of necessity or convenience, chose what would be made official. Helen, mother of Constantine, was the one who determined the traditional location of Sinai, based on visions and oral reports, rather than material evidence. The choice made sense within the geopolitical context of the time. But today, with technological resources and access to new regions, the pieces of the puzzle are beginning to be reorganized. And the picture that emerges is unsettling. This type of hidden truth kept in the shadows for centuries cannot be sustained eternally, especially now, in an era where information circulates in real time, where satellite images are within reach of anyone with internet access, and where independent researchers increasingly have a voice. The world is changing, and along with it, the way we seek the sacred also changes. And it is exactly at this point that the journey takes on a new meaning. It is not just about proving a historical fact, but about facing the fear of change. The fear of seeing the castle of certainties shake. It is difficult for any institution, whether religious, political, or academic, to deal with discoveries that deconstruct what has been maintained for so long. But perhaps it is precisely this shock that brings us closer to the essence of faith. Not the faith built on unquestionable traditions, but the faith that grows by investigating, by doubting with respect, by opening space for the divine to reveal itself in new ways. Because faith is not about comfort zone, it's about journey. And every true journey passes through unknown territories, through landscapes that take our breath away, and through questions that challenge us. And what makes Jebel al-Lawz so impactful is not just what it appears to be, but what it awakens within us. The possibility that this is the real Mount Sinai doesn't just affect maps, it messes with the way we were taught to believe. It takes courage to admit that perhaps the truth never disappeared. It was just displaced, covered up by layers of interpretation, tradition, and control. So the big question now is no longer, is it there? The real question is, are we ready to deal with what this could mean? Because recognizing a new Sinai means allowing the biblical story to resurface with more strength, more clarity, more proximity. It is taking a step towards a transformation that begins with understanding, goes through mentality, and directly affects our relationship with the sacred. And perhaps deep down, this is exactly what is being avoided, that the world wakes up to something that has always been before our eyes, but required attention, courage, and a thirst for truth to be perceived. Comment there. This changes everything. For me, now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the discovery of a possible new Mount Sinai is not just an archaeological curiosity, It is a piece that, if placed in the right place, can destabilize an entire construction of spiritual, theological, and even prophetic understanding. If the real Mount Sinai is indeed located in another country, this does not just affect the limits of biblical maps. This lifts a heavy curtain over everything we thought we knew about the sacred setting of divine revelation. And the impact of this goes far beyond the physical territory. It directly reaches the territory of the soul, the collective consciousness, and our vision of the present time. Because if a localization error lasted for millennia and shaped entire generations of biblical interpretation, what else could be out of place? How many other events recorded in Scripture are waiting to be revisited with more awake eyes? Are we interpreting the world around us based on ancient, symbolic, and sometimes distorted maps, while the true marks of God's presence remain hidden beneath the dust of the desert and politics? This possible reunion with the original Sinai does not just represent a geographical correction. It carries within it the potential to open a new stage of our spiritual journey, where the old connects with the current, and the promises made in the past begin to align with the signs we see today. When we talk about Sinai, we talk about a place of covenant, a point of origin, where a nation was formed, where eternal laws were handed down, and where God spoke with an audible voice before an entire people. These same people who, according to the prophecies, would come together again in recent times. What if this is starting to happen now? What if the revelation of the true Sinai is part of the restoration of Israel, not just as a state, but as a prophetic sign of the eschatological clock moving? The restoration of sacred sites, original roots, forgotten alliances. All of this can be part of a much larger process, which goes beyond archaeology and enters directly into the field of biblical prophecies. The book of Isaiah, for example, talks about a path in the desert. Ezekiel describes a time when the people would see clearly again. And Revelation suggests that ancient truths would be revealed in due time, as if the veil were being lifted, part by part. What we see now, perhaps, is just the beginning of this, a sign that the gears are already turning. And if we accept this possibility seriously, then we have to consider another profound implication. We are living in a time where spiritual decisions can no longer be postponed. The line between faith and reality is becoming increasingly blurred. It is no longer possible to separate what is written from what is happening. The revelation of places like the real Sinai could trigger a new collective understanding about who we are, where we came from, and, most importantly, where we are going. Because you see, this discovery changes not just the past, it changes the future. When the foundation changes, the entire building needs to be overhauled. And the Bible is full of patterns, cycles, symbolic repetitions. Sinai is not just the mountain of law. It is also a symbol of return, a reminder that God always speaks to his people when the darkness seems thickest. And maybe that's what's happening now, a new calling. Not just to look back and rediscover, but to look forward and understand that we are entering a phase in history where old secrets are coming to the surface because there is something bigger about to happen. It may seem like an exaggeration, but stop and think. When was the last time that something that seemed forgotten emerged with so much force, with so many signs, in the middle of the information age? And why is this drawing attention right now, when so many are searching for direction, for meaning, for answers? The truth, no matter how dormant it may be, always finds an opening. And when it emerges, it demands transformation. It requires a new mindset, a willingness to leave the known and walk, once again, through a land of discoveries, right there. That makes sense to me. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because after everything we've covered so far, from the archaeological clues to the behind-the-scenes decisions that shaped our perception of Mount Sinai, it's impossible not to feel that we're facing something bigger, something that goes beyond the simple act of locating a mountain and begins to touch a more intimate, deeper dimension, one that involves our choices, our values, and the way we see what we call truth. The big question that arises here is not just whether or not they hid the real Mount Sinai. The real question is, why would they hide it? What was so dangerous, or perhaps so transformative, about this revelation? Because what is at stake is not just the place itself, but what it represents. Sinai is the symbol of a covenant, the scene of a divine calling, the place where an entire people witnessed something that defied all human logic. If all this happened, as the sacred text describes, and if the physical remains still exist, then confirmation of this location is more than a historical curiosity. It is a threat to any system that depends on the control of spiritual information. And here comes a delicate point, but one that needs to be said honestly. Not every religious institution is prepared to deal with discoveries that decentralize its authority. If the real Sinai is where the evidence is pointing to it, and not where tradition has it fixed, then a lot will need to be revised. This creates discomfort, and where there is discomfort, there is often resistance. Not necessarily out of bad intentions, but out of fear of the impact that the truth can have. Truth has this characteristic. It does not ask permission to enter. She enters, and when she enters, she changes everything. It restructures beliefs, shakes certainties, forces the repositioning of our ideas. And above all, it requires decision. Deciding to face the unknown, question the established, consider the possibility that something so monumental has been left aside or hidden, that takes courage. A courage that not everyone is ready to exercise. Because it's not just about believing in a new theory. It is about allowing a personal transformation, a renewal of mentality, a spiritual repositioning. It's as if, in discovering the real Mount Sinai, we are also rediscovering forgotten parts of our own faith. As if the echo of that voice on the mountain was still resounding, waiting to be heard by those with attentive ears and an available heart. And when we open ourselves to this possibility, we begin to realize that there is an invisible thread that connects everything, the past, the present, and the future. What happened on the mountain was not tied to time. He is a reminder, a summons, a mark. And that brand, when rediscovered, has the power to activate something new within us. A different awareness, a quiet urgency, a call to look at Scripture more deeply, and at ourselves more honestly. This is where this journey stops being just informative and becomes spiritual. Perhaps what had been hidden for so long was not just a place, but a truth that bothers, that shakes, that liberates. A truth that reminds us that, regardless of where the physical mountain is, what really matters is the willingness to climb up to it, to face the climb, the silence, the sacred, and understand that there are things that are only revealed to those who decide not to stop at the base but to continue, step by step, even without guarantees, just with faith. Right there, true mountain. If you've made it this far, it's because something in this content resonated within you. Perhaps an old doubt has taken shape. Perhaps a new perspective has opened up. And that's why it makes so much sense to invite you to subscribe here to the channel, because this journey is just beginning. And if this type of reflection, which mixes faith, history, and discovery, makes sense to you, then this space is also yours. Leave a like on this video if at any point you felt that this conversation really touched you. This helps keep this content alive, reaching more people who are also looking for answers that don't come ready-made, but that emerge when we decide to look in more depth. And if you stayed until the end, write it in the comments. I'm with you until the end. Because knowing who walked with me this far is really special. There is a video here that complements this topic and will take you even deeper into this journey. Click and stay with me there. The next revelation may be closer than you think.